All right, welcome back to Fundamentals of Philosophy. I am once again John Taylor, and we're going to wrap up the readings for, or the lectures for Module 3 with David Hume and Immanuel Kant. So let's jump right into it. Descartes creates a new vision of the mind, right? It's existentially certain. We're certain it exists. I think, therefore I am. But it's separated out from the world. It's locked within the Cartesian theater. Locke projects images composed of secondary qualities upon the screen of the theater. So he lets our experiences produce these sensory ideas that then paint a picture of the world. But we're watching the representation. We're not seeing the world. Berkeley tosses out the distinction between primary and secondary qualities entirely. It's like you're not justified in inferring anything outside of the representation. So he throws out the entire external world. And now, at last, the Scottish philosopher David Hume is going to take the final step in dismantling epistemology's foundations, demolishing key concepts such as causation, induction, and the self, and leaving philosophy with profound and unsettling questions. Hume is the great destroyer of early modern philosophy. And by all accounts, he was actually a nice guy. But you can actually go to Scotland. My wife and I got married in Scotland. And in Edinburgh, they have this giant statue of David Hume. And there's it's a philosopher's pilgrimage where people go there and rub the toe for good luck of the statue. And you can see it's like rubbed, like the bronze is rubbed off. And so Hume is hugely important, both to philosophy and to Scotland. So very few concepts escape his skeptical eye unscathed. The questions raised in an inquiry concerning human understanding still haunt philosophy to this day. David Hume is the specter haunting philosophy. Like Locke and Berkeley, Hume is an empiricist. But Hume takes Locke's notion of sensation farther, analyzing the sensory content of our mind into two categories: impressions and ideas. So impressions are forceful, vivid, and immediate. These are imposed directly upon us by our experiences in the world. And you can see this for yourself. Especially if you have any sort of experience that is maybe fraught, whether it's a confrontation at work or something like a near accident when you're driving, these are extremely powerful experiences that leave a very vivid impression upon you. And you can reflect on these later after the fact. And you can bring up a sort of an idea, an image of the original impression, but it's not the same. It doesn't have the same vivacious quality of the immediate impression. It's not as forceful. It's not as dramatic. It's not as vivid. In recollection, these appear paler, fainter, less forceful. Hume uses the term ideas specifically to refer to these secondhand copies of our direct impression. So that's where the idea-impression split comes from. The impression is the forceful immediacy of the moment as you're living it. And the idea is when you reflect back on that moment and sort of bring up the mental image of that, the copy of that is an idea within your mind. Once you do that, similar to Locke's mental operation of reflection, Hume notes that our minds have the ability to perform operations that combine or augment or diminish or transpose our ideas in order to create or imagine new concepts. A sort of infamous example of this is with the concept of God. Hume basically interprets that as humans, we sort of take our best characteristics, right, our power and our virtue, and we magnify them. We blow them up into like the largest, the most possible good being, the most possible powerful being. We infinitely expand or augment these characteristics, and that's how we arrive at the concept of God, according to Hume. So for Hume, this is the source of all knowledge. Immediate impressions are recalled as ideas, which may be modified or combined through reason. Standard kind of empiricist stuff so far. So with this framework of impressions and ideas in place, Hume turns to a central distinction in human knowledge, now commonly referred to as Hume's fork. And it's a fork because it's got two tines. On one is what he calls relations of ideas. On the other one is what he calls matters of fact. Relations of ideas refer to pure deductive a priori reasoning. Literally, they're taking ideas and performing operations on them that relate them in a logically deductive way that does not appeal to experience. You've already had the experience, you've already had the impression that produced the idea, and now you're conducting it to this process of relating the ideas. And we can deduce mathematical truths in this way, like 2 plus 2, or 2 times 2 equals 4, or 2 plus 2 equals 4. We know this a priori. We don't have to test it in the world through experience, right? It's a mathematical truth. Same with sort of syllogistic logic, the sort of things we covered in the previous module. So we deduce the truth of these statements. We deduce the truth of these statements simply by submitting our ideas to the relations of logical inference. Matters of fact, on the other hand, are inductive and a posteriori in character. Remember, a posteriori means after or through experience. A priori is prior to experience, and this refers to the source of the idea, the source of the knowledge. If it's arrived at a priori, then we arrive at it before we have to go to experience. We know it without testing it. If it's a posteriori, then we know it after an experiment or through the experience itself. That the sun will rise tomorrow is not a certainty that's guaranteed by any appeal to pure logic. You're not gonna deduce that logically, syllogistically. We base our belief that the sun will continue to rise on our observations and experiences of facts within the world. Specifically, we have observed that the sun has risen in the past, so we infer that it will continue to rise in the future. And by extension, we assume that the future will resemble the past. Famously, Hume insists that any claim not reducible to either a relation of ideas or to a matter of fact, any statement that doesn't fit on either one of the tines of Hume's fork is meaningless. And he's got a great quote here, so I'm going to quote the whole thing. If we take in our hand any volume of divinity or school metaphysics, for instance, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? No. Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matters of fact and existence? No. Commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. And that's kind of his target here, is metaphysics, the meaning of metaphysical statements. Among the things Hume commits to the flame are the notions of the self provided by both Descartes and Locke. So when examining his impressions and ideas, and Hume is very strict about it, like literally if it does not come, and him and Berkeley share this in common, I think, if it doesn't come directly from the experience, then you have no justification for including it in your theory. Everything has to come from experience. So when he's looking at his impressions and his ideas based on experience, Hume finds neither the substantive immaterial self of Descartes nor the coherent and unified continuity of memory suggested by Locke. Excuse me. Neither one of those things. So neither the cogito nor Locke's idea of personal identity is being established by this continuity of memory that connects identity over time. Instead, Hume finds only, and this is a quote, a bundle or collection of different perceptions which succeed each other with an inconceivable rapidity and are in a perpetual flux and movement. So this is what's called the bundle theory of the self. Hume rejects the notion that there's any real or singular entity that answers to the name of the self. He's actually a skeptic about the notion of the self. When he looks inside of his own mind, all he sees is this shifting and fluid association of impressions and ideas. It's constantly shifting, constantly changing, constantly transforming. It's all perceptions, and they're just sort of aggregated and changing and being replaced one thought after another without any necessary connection or cohesion. So the idea of a cohesive self seems to him to be based on something other than experience. That's not what he believes we actually experience when we investigate, really sort of put pressure on what we mean when we talk about the self. So the term self for Hume represents neither a relation of ideas nor a matter of fact. So it fails both the tests of Hume's fork. It's merely a convenient, admittedly, but confused verbal convention, a habit. So to the flames with it. Induction, the problem of induction. We've talked about this a little bit in Module 2, and Bertrand Russell does, once again, provides an article for us that summarizes the sort of Humean problem here, like he did with Locke and Berkeley and the appearance and reality problem. He does that again here, and for anyone who finds Hume is actually, for his time period, I think a really fluid and accessible writer. He's a really good prose stylist, unlike, say, Locke or Kant. But Russell is writing in the actual 20th century, so his stuff is a lot more accessible, and his way of summarizing things is very intuitive. So I recommend, even if you read, and you should read both the Hume and the Russell, but the Russell does a good job of summarizing Hume's problem of induction, or what has become known as the problem of induction based upon Hume. And so yeah, recall from Module 2 that induction operates by observing a consistent pattern of individual cases. It's generalizing out from the specific. And we see one event that is reliably followed by another event, right? An event is reliably followed by a predictable outcome. So we assume that it will continue to be. When we assume that the sun will rise tomorrow, based on our experience of the sun rising in the past, we are implicitly moving beyond the evidence of a pattern to infer a more general assumption about what Russell calls the uniformity of nature, or the belief that everything that has happened, this is a quote from Russell, the belief that everything that has happened or will happen is an instance of some general law to which there are no exceptions. So when we see, two events that constantly occur one after the other, or when we see something a pattern that keeps happening over and over again in nature, like the rising of the sun, we assume that there's a law behind it. It isn't just a series of random, unconnected occurrences. We assume that there's a reason for the pattern, that there's something universal at work here, that there's a necessity at play that is causing this to happen over and over again. But that's going beyond experience. But as we have seen, induction cannot provide this certainty. And again, we talked about this in the last module. While denying deductive truths results in a contradiction, and that's one of the big distinctions that Hume wants to point out here, is that denying something deductive like the truths of mathematics or deductive logic will lead you to a contradiction. But there is no inherent contradiction in denying that the sun will rise tomorrow. It's completely within the realm of logical possibility that there could be some unforeseen cosmological event that alters the constitution of our solar system in such a way that the sun fails to rise in the morning. A meteorite knocks us out of orbit in some way, or something happens. Choose your catastrophic cosmological event that prevents the sun from rising. You probably will only get to see it happen once, whatever it is, because the sun is pretty important to us. But it's not logically impossible. There could be a break in the pattern. The pattern isn't necessitated by logic to continue. No amount of corroboratory evidence can ever decisively verify an inductive inference. And like Einstein said in the last module, it's 100 experiments will fail to verify my theory, but one can disprove it. There could always be some disconfirming exception to the pattern that we simply haven't encountered yet. And the sort of basis of the problem of induction is that the assumption that the future will resemble the past is itself an inductive inference. Why do we assume the future will resemble the past? Because it always has in the past. The future has always resembled the past, so of course the future will continue to resemble the past. But that's circular. You can't base induction upon inductive reasoning. You can't justify it by an appeal to itself. It's a vicious circle, and it doesn't work. So Hume's objection to induction goes farther than this and threatens the foundation of all of our pretensions to knowledge. And this is what really gets Kant involved. He's going to come after causation here. Consider Hume's example of two billiard balls in a game of pool. Billiard balls are just pool balls. We strike the first ball and it travels in a straight line, striking the second ball. There's an impact, and then the second ball careens off in another direction. Boom, boom. We say in this case that the impact from the first billiard ball causes the motion of the second billiard ball. But how exactly did we reach that conclusion? It's not a fact of deductive logic. We didn't plug billiard balls and their impacts into a syllogism that spit out the logically necessary truth that an impact from one billiard ball will necessarily result in the motion of the second billiard ball. So our knowledge isn't based on relations of ideas. It fails the first kind of Hume's fork, the first test. We must arrive at the conclusion then as a matter of fact based upon inductive reasoning grounded in our direct impressions. There's a problem. What have we actually observed? We saw one thing happen. We saw the impact of the first ball. And then we saw another thing happen. We saw the motion of the second ball. We saw one event and then another. But that's not usually what we're talking about when we talk about causation, is it? We don't just mean one thing after another. One thing happened and then another thing happened. It's like the sun rose and then the sun rose and then the sun rose. There was an impact and then the ball moved, and these things are unconnected. They're just two things that happened. What we mean is, when we say causation, is that there exists some kind of transfer of motion, that there's some implicit connection or power that necessarily links the occurrence of the two events, some sort of necessary connection, that it's not just one thing after another, that there's some innate reason, something that's necessarily making the first event cause the second event. The problem is that we never actually observe this necessary connection, do we? We infer that some such necessary connection or secret power must exist because we have observed many cases of events following other events in a similar manner. We've seen pool balls hit other pool balls, and the impact caused the second pool ball to fly off towards the pocket or wherever it goes. We've experienced this many times, but all this establishes is a correlation. It doesn't establish causation or tell us what causation means. It establishes what Hume calls constant conjunction between two types of events. And constant conjunction here just means that whenever we see event of type A, we tend to see event of type B with it. We tend to see these two events following one after the other. They are constantly conjoined in our experience. We haven't experienced exceptions to them. We've just seen these two things happen one after the other over and over again. So when we observe the impact of the two billiard balls, we anticipate that the same pattern of constant conjunction is going to occur again. That's that whole thing about the future is going to resemble the past because it always has before. Yeah, and that is, we expect that the future will resemble the past. But as we've already seen, inductive reasoning cannot justify that inference. Further, we must also assume that we do also assume, Further, we also assume that there is some underlying explanation, some hidden reason that explains why the future must resemble the past. But again, this inference is based on neither deduction nor induction. We can't inductively demonstrate that the future will resemble the past because that's justifying induction by an appeal to induction. That's circular reasoning. And we can't do it deductively because there's nothing in the motion of the second billiard ball that is logically necessitated according to the rules of logic and deduction by the impact. It's not the sort of thing that fits into that deductive relationship. We never actually receive any direct sense impression that refers to the concept of necessary connection or of causation or of universal law. And that's the thing that Hume is going to hammer home here, is that we're not basing this upon deductive or inductive reasoning. We're not even basing this on bad induction. The problem of induction is just a bad use of induction. But in the case of causation, we're not even basing it on induction, because induction implies that we've experienced something. And we've never experienced necessary connection. We've only experienced one thing followed by another. That's it. Two events unconnected that have occurred and left their impression. We have the impression of event A and then the impression of event B. We never observe what it is that we assume makes event B caused by event A, that necessitates that relationship, that connection between cause and effect. And this generalizes to all necessary connections. So the idea of laws of nature is put at risk by this. We never actually observe anything like a law of nature. We just observe regularities. All we've ever actually witnessed is the repeated conjunction of one unconnected sense impression after another. That's it. If we're empiricists, that's all we've seen. Our belief in causation and the uniformity of nature then is not actually based in any type of reasoning, either inductive or deductive. It's a habit. All it is a habit or custom that we've developed over time. And it's useless as an explanation, therefore, for any natural event. I mean, and Hume uses the example, imagine someone, like an alien is dropped from some other world, or someone who's had their memory wiped or something is dropped directly into the middle of this pool game and sees the impact of the billiard balls. And, if assuming that they have a language they can describe things, and you ask them to describe it, they're going to say this happened and then that happened. They're not going to say this caused that. They're not going to refer to this mysterious notion of causation because they haven't lived through the experience enough times to develop this habit of expecting a necessary connection between the first event and the second event. The reason that we assume that there's such a connection is because we've just seen these two things happen back to back over X number of times. But that's not itself an actually valid reason to make the inference. Empirically, we never observe the necessary connection, so we're not justified in making the inference of causal power based on our actual experience. And we can't really derive it from induction because, again, this is based on the assumption that the future will continue to resemble the past, which is both circular and can very easily be wrong because there could always be some exception to the pattern. We can test it over and over again, but we're never going to test every single occurrence that could possibly happen. There could always be, outside of our sample, there could always be like one other example that disconfirms the hypothesis. So with these simple arguments, Hume demolishes the foundations for the self, inductive reasoning, and the principle of causation. It's not bad for a day's work. And with them, the foundations for all empirical and scientific knowledge are cast to the flames. Hume's philosophy leaves us with what contemporary thinkers, and this comes specifically from David Lewis, who I think we'll read a little bit from in a later module, Lewis calls the Humean mosaic, which is a vision of the world, of reality, of the universe, that is composed of singular, isolated events with no intrinsic or innate connections. No necessary connection at all, just one thing after another, a world of disjointed occurrences, each following the next with no necessary relationship. A universe just of unconnected individual events. Hume's radical skepticism left philosophy in a radical state. This is a hugely influential argument. All of these. It raised questions so profound that they jolted the German philosopher Immanuel Kant from his self-described dogmatic slumber. So Kant credits Hume here with sort of waking him up, like he had taken all these things for granted, and Hume makes these arguments, and Kant is like, oh, wow, okay. Things just got real, and I've got to respond to this. So in response to Hume's challenge, Kant sets out to reconcile empiricism with rationalism. That's how he's going to approach this. To heal the division within early modern philosophy, to set reason upon what he calls the secure path of a science. And a lot of that is Kant feeling that philosophy should have as firm of a foundation as the sciences, and to reshape philosophy into the discipline that we know today. So Kant stands as a transitional figure here. Hume basically tears down everything from the early modern period, and then Kant rebuilds the foundations for what philosophy is today. Both the analytic and the continental styles of philosophy both have their genesis or origin in Immanuel Kant's response to Hume. So what was it? And up front, Kant is a terrible writer, and his arguments are very complicated, and you do not have to be able to reproduce every step of Kant for anything graded in this course. The general you want to sort of get the general sense of what he's doing, but you don't need to really internalize. There are still people debating what he means. There are people who have been arguing about what Kant means for their entire careers. So, Hume's attack on induction, causation, and the self are all grounded in his division of knowledge into relations of ideas and matters of fact. So, this division draws upon the divisions we've already looked at, right? Between deductive and inductive reasoning and a priori and a posteriori reasoning. And while all of these are related, they each highlight a different aspect of reasoning. The deductive induction thing focuses on the formal structure and the degree of certainty, right? Deduction is certain, it's formal and syllogistic. Induction does not lead to certainty, but it does. It's acquired through experience and leads to new knowledge. The a priori, a posteriori split is about the source of knowledge, where it comes from. Whether it comes prior to experience, as in the case of a priori, or whether it comes after or through experience, as in the case of a posteriori. Hume's split between relations of ideas and matter of facts draws on both of these, but applies them. What was sort of new and novel about it was the application that he made of these concepts to theories of knowledge specifically. Before Kant, it remained generally understood that these categories overlapped completely. Deduction, a priori, relations of ideas were just three ways of saying the same thing. And on the other side, induction, a posteriori, and matters of fact, again, three different ways of saying the same thing. Kant's going to blow this up. He is going to show that this is not necessarily the case, that you can have something, that there is another type of knowledge. And that's where Kant's like real important. He's going to show that there's another way to know. So Kant recognized the potential destructive force in Hume's attack, right? That's how he was shocked out of his dogmatic slumber. If we could only be certain about deductive a priori arguments, then scientific knowledge was not the only thing that was put at risk. Hume's arguments against causation generalized to create an all-pervasive skepticism that threatened to render any statements concerning God, free will, ethics, and the whole of metaphysical knowledge as meaningless. Everything cast to the flames. What was needed was some analysis that would preserve the certainty of a priori statements while still allowing us to acquire new knowledge about the world. That's what Kant's up to here. And he discovered the key to this problem in his distinction between what he calls analytic and synthetic propositions. So he's looking for a way to preserve the certainty of the a priori, of deductive a priori statements. But as we've seen, the problem with them is that they don't give you new knowledge. They're tautological. And he believes that you can find a way to actually acquire knowledge about the world that is certain, that is a priori, that does not depend on sensory experience. This is how he's going to put rationalism and empiricism together. And this is how he's going to perhaps not heal the split, but how he's going to sort of wipe the slate clean. He's going to create a new blank slate moving forward, where philosophy is going to be approaching these questions much differently in the wake of Kant. Now, an analytic proposition is what's called a logical tautology. A tautology means that it basically just says the same thing twice. Its subject is contained within its predicate. And, the subject and predicate form of a proposition is like, the snow is white. The snow is the subject, white is the predicate. The predicate describes the subject. Take all bachelors are unmarried men. That's the sort of classic example here of a tautological statement. It's an analytic statement because the predicate, unmarried men, is just another way of restating the subject, which is bachelor. Those two things mean the same thing. If you understand the meaning of bachelor, you understand that that means unmarried man. That's simply what the words mean. So saying that all bachelors are unmarried men doesn't give you new information. It's restating the same thing twice. Analytic truths are thus necessarily true. It can't be false because it's literally just saying the same thing twice. But they provide no new knowledge about the world. You're not getting any new information out of this. All the information in the predicate is already there in the subject. Synthetic statements, on the other hand, are statements in which the predicate is not contained within the subject. So they are what Kant calls ampliative, which means that the predicate amplifies. It's additive. It adds something new. It expands the subject by adding new information. It brings something new to the table. All bachelors are unhappy. It's a synthetic statement because unhappy does not have the same meaning as bachelor. There are some bachelors who are happy. There are some bachelors who are unhappy. It's not the sort of thing that you can logically deduce. It's not tautological that if one is going to be a bachelor, then one is necessarily going to be unhappy. If a bachelor is unhappy, then that's new information. It's not contained within the subject. It adds, it amplifies. The predicate unhappy adds new information that is not already contained within the subject of bachelor. And I hope that's clear, because it's kind of tricky and kind of convoluted, but it is an important distinction, and what Kant's going to do with it is pretty remarkable. So Kant's question then is this: is it possible for a proposition to both tell us new information about the world, to be ampliative, in his words, and to be universally true, independent of investigation? In other words, can there be synthetic a priori propositions? So, a priori, true, universally, independent of experience, and synthetic, meaning that they contain new information, that they amplify, that they expand our definition, they provide new information. Is that possible? And this would have been inconceivable before he made that distinction, because it was just assumed that that's what a priori and a posteriori mean. You can't get new information out of an a priori statement by definition, and Kant believes that you can. And people still argue over this point. So Kant contends that all metaphysical statements, such as the statement, every event has a cause, so he's really zeroing in on that one from Hume, must be examples of synthetic a priori reasoning. So this is the tool he's going to use to try to get out of the bind that Hume has put us in. They both express a certain truth that is known prior to experience, a priori, and they provide us with new information about the world, so they're synthetic. So every event has a cause is something that we know a priori and something that gives us new information. To establish the legitimacy of the synthetic a priori, Kant begins with an example from geometry. And again, you're not going to have to know these. I'm going to give them to you, but don't feel like you have to go through the steps here. Consider the statement, a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points. This represents an a priori assertion. We do not need to test whether a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points in experience. It's universally true. We understand that. But the concept of shortest distance is not already contained within the concept of straight line. We know it's true a priori, but it's not because it's tautological. The statement can't be analytic, you see. You can't get the notion of shortest distance out of the notion of straight line. It's got to be synthetic. It adds something new, but it adds it without an appeal to experience. This demonstration allows Kant to make a crucial point. To make sense of geometric statements, our minds must first already possess what he calls a pure intuition regarding space And this makes sense for geometry because geometry is all about spatial qualities. The concept of space is not acquired through experience, according to Kant. The ability to perceive objects as having size, shape, position, that sort of thing, all the geometric properties, already presupposes that they exist within a spatial framework. So if we're going to talk about geometrical proofs, if we're going to talk about the shape, the size, the position of objects, then we're already presuming that there is something called space that acts as a framework in the background in order for those concepts to make sense. The notions would be incoherent if we didn't already presume that space exists as the framework in which that gives context, that gives meaning to statements about size, shape, position, etc. But it represents a universal truth. It exists prior to experience. It's a priori. And it's synthetic because it allows us to make the synthetic judgments required for geometry. So the assertion here is that the statement, a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, is a synthetic a priori statement. And the reason that this is true, how we are able to make that move to get a statement that's both universally true without an appeal to experience, is because we have to have this background of space, this pure intuition of space already as a framing mechanism. Our mind has to come sort of pre-installed with that. This has got to be a foundational structural fact of our ability to comprehend reality in order for us to talk about geometry in the first place. Kant provides a similar demonstration for arithmetic, demonstrating that statements such as 5 plus 7 equal 12 presuppose that we possess a pure intuition regarding time. So space and time are both pure intuitions. A temporal, and he's referring to time here as like a temporal framework that allows us to categorize numbers and combine them in ordered sequences. So we've got to be able, in order to perform operations like 5 plus 7, what we're doing is we're taking numbers and we are putting them in a sequence where we're able to combine or multiply or subtract, perform these operations on them that produce answers, that produce conclusions. And in order for us to be able to perform these operations, we have to already suppose that something like time exists. There has to be a temporal framework, again, just like with space. Time has to be in the background already in order for temporal sequences to happen, right? You can't have a thing happening after another thing unless you presuppose that time already exists, or that time is already a framework that is in place to allow that sequence to occur. So the pure intuitions of space and time thus represent the necessary organizational framework that our minds must employ in order to have an experience in the first place. That's the move. They are preconditions for the very possibility of experience. And this is why Kant's philosophy is called transcendental, because it is all about looking at our experience of the world and asking the question, what has to be the case in order for it to be possible for us to have these experiences in the first place? He's going beyond experience, but he's going beyond experience in a way that looks for the conditions that make experience possible. How is it possible that we have experience? Well, we have to have these intuitions of space and time already in place. Otherwise, we can't make sense of sensory input or explanations. Returning to the statement that every event has a cause, Kant accepts both of Hume's primary critiques. So, I mean, he's willing to hand Hume, he's going to give him both of these arguments. The mere repetition of a sequence cannot prove universal necessity, which is the critique of induction. You can't establish necessity just because things are in constant conjunction. Excuse me. And our individual experiences do not provide us with evidence for necessary connection, which is Hume's critique of causation. We see one thing happen after another, but we don't see this mysterious power of causation that's supposed to link them together. Kant's like, yeah, no, you're right. We don't have those two things. But within the intuitive frameworks of space and time, certain categories of understanding, Kant's categories, must also already exist that give order and sequence to our experiences. Otherwise, our sensory input would be chaotic and unintelligible. In order for us to be able to make sense of experiences, this framework of time and space has to already exist. These intuitions have to already exist. They have to already be a part of our the structure of our mental apparatus. What he's describing is the structure of the mind. What has to be the case for minds, the structure that minds have to have if they're going to be the sorts of things that have experiences. That's the move. The concept of causation represents one such category for Kant. So this is how he resolves the puzzle. Events are perceived as occurring in time, and the mind applies the category of causality to synthesize. This is his transcendental synthesis. To synthesize temporal sequences into coherent experiences. So he's got the intuitions and the categories. The intuitions are the background frameworks, space and time, and the categories are the concepts, like causation, that are required to ensure that our experiences occur in an ordered, comprehensible sequence. So he synthesizes the intuitions and the categories, and this ensures that each event universally and necessarily follows from a prior cause. That's the move. That's the transcendental move. That's why it's called transcendental idealism. This is Kant's transcendental term. I've just said transcendental a bunch of times. What he calls his Copernican revolution, and he's referring to Nikolai Copernicus, who was the first, not the first, but who proposed that the Earth revolves around the sun rather than the sun revolving around the Earth. And this is before Galileo, who we talked about previously in the previous video, who demonstrated it with a telescope and got persecuted by the church. He was proving Copernicus. So what Copernicus did was he flipped the script, right? We thought things were one way, and then he proposes, no, you've got it backwards. It's exactly the opposite. He stands it on its head. And Kant is doing the same thing with the priority of mind and objects. No longer should philosophy be concerned with explaining how mind conforms to objects. Instead, Kant argues that it is objects that must conform to the organizational structure of the mind. That is a huge change in the order of priority. In order for knowledge to be at all possible, there must first be universally true conditions which structure the ability of our minds to order and comprehend information. The possibility of knowledge depends on these being in place, and these are mental properties. He is locating these in the mind. This is the structure of our mental apparatus. He is describing how mind has to be in order for experiences to occur. We cannot have an experience that does not already presuppose notions such as space, time, and causation. They're already built in. These are necessary and universal truths without which the world would be incomprehensible. But they are truths about our minds, not about the world. This is the price. That's the price you pay for this. Kant and all philosophers who follow him, everyone who's a Kantian, there are a lot of Kantians, must pay the price, this price for fending off Hume's skepticism and achieving certainty about experience. We possess absolute and certain knowledge about the underlying mental frameworks that allow our minds to organize and comprehend our experience in the world. But about the world as it is in itself, outside of those mental frameworks, we can, in principle, have no knowledge at all. This not only describes, Kant is not only describing the preconditions that have to be in place in order for experiences to happen, he's also describing the limits of our mind. That these represent the only ways that our mind can understand experience. So what is beyond that, what is outside of that, is unknowable. Causation, space, time, and that's just a sample. He gives more categories, but outside of that, we cannot conceive of anything outside of those categories. That represents a limit condition. That is the extent of our ability to comprehend things. Kant uses the term phenomena to refer to the ordered, structured content of knowing minds. That's what we experience, the phenomenon, the phenomenal world, and the word noumena to refer to the external world of things in themselves. So the noumena, the noumenal world, is things as they actually are in themselves. And about that, we can know nothing. About phenomena, we have certain knowledge. We can know certainly that space, time, and causation exist because we wouldn't be able to have experiences without them. But what lies beyond our mind's ability to intuit and categorize is, by definition, beyond our mind's ability to comprehend. The noumena is not just unknown, it's unknowable. And this is why what he's doing is different from what Locke or Berkeley are doing. He's not just saying that we don't know what's outside of our experience. He's saying we can't know, that it's literally unknowable. The way our minds are structured, there is a limit to the amount of things that we can process. There is an upper bound on our ability to perceive reality. And this provides us with certainty. We know that things that fall within that world are true. But what's outside of it, we can't touch. Our minds can't do it. It's beyond the ability of the mind to do. And this is Kant's transcendental idealism, which saved causation and metaphysical knowledge from Hume's flames, but at what some would consider a pretty big cost. Unlike Berkeley, Kant acknowledges the existence of the world beyond our minds, but it is a world whose character is beyond our mind's capacities to comprehend. The noumenal outside is an alien landscape, a Lovecraftian realm of truths beyond the comprehension of the mere mortal mind. It is wholly and completely other than what our minds can ever possibly conceive. And this sort of makes sense intuitively in a different way if we consider that if we consider that our minds and brains evolved in a specific planet, a specific time and place to deal with phenomena occurring sort of at specific speeds and at specific magnitudes. Like things, Richard Dawkins calls this middle world, which is not entirely accurate, but the point he's trying to underline is that when things get really big or really small, we stop being able to process that information effectively. That's why we can't understand quantum mechanics. Dawkins' phrase for that is it's not just stranger than we think, it's stranger than we can think. And, Richard Feynman says something similar. That and this goes for velocities too. When you're approaching the speed of light, or you're getting things that are really slow and moving sort of cosmological speeds, again, that falls outside of our ability to comprehend. We have problems with huge numbers. This is why they're always trying to put a human face on like large tragedies, because when we start talking about certain magnitudes of numbers, it outstrips our mind's ability to actually reason about, because our minds didn't evolve to do that. That's not the kind of reasoning that ensures survival for a species like us in an environment like the one we're in. We didn't evolve truth-seeking, like the senses that are able to penetrate absolute truth, because we didn't need to. And in fact, that would probably be detrimental to our attempts to survive as a species. So there are limits to the mind that are just built in by the facts of what kind of creature we are and what kind of minds that we have. And what Kant's doing here is using the tools of deductive and inductive logic, using the analytic and synthetic distinction in combination with the a priori and a posteriori distinction to arrive at this conclusion a long time, before Darwin or any of that. Maybe not a long time, but before. And so we end the early modern period. kind of worse off than we started, right? We have less certainty now. Now we're not just in the Cartesian theater. Now we're in this weird Lovecraftian space where we have this vast ocean of reality that is beyond the possibility of our mind's comprehension, the noumenal beyond to wrestle with. And I think that's probably a good place to end. In the written version of this that I'm going to provide you guys with, it's going to be a long document because it's going to be like all 3 lectures together. And it also includes a bit at the end referring to the contemporary readings that are in our textbook. I'm not going to go through those here. You can read them in the text I'm going to provide. You can read the actual articles. I do recommend doing so. I'm going to point out which ones are important to focus on for the graded portions in the focus topics that I send out. But yeah, justified true belief, Gettier problems, Susan Hack's stuff. I mean, it's all really good stuff. Standpoint epistemology. Read it. We want you engaged with contemporary philosophy as well as having the sort of foundation of how we got here. But hopefully the story of how we passed from Descartes to Kant, how we got through that period and sort of set the stage for modern philosophy. Hopefully this has been interesting and accessible for you. And I look forward to reading your discussions and ultimately your papers. And that's it. I'm out.